Good morning and welcome back to a very special edition of Let It Be Known. This morning, we're going to talk to a journalist who covered the Bill Cosby trial end to end. But first, before we do that, and that's Nicole Lewis, by the way, who's been extraordinary on this case. But first, let us just review some of the headlines today, or a couple of headlines anyway. And I'll start with a really nice story this morning. June Hassan, a mother from Atlanta, Georgia, says she was pleasantly surprised when her children decided to help pay off her house. It started out as a joke. June had always made fun of telling her son and daughters to pay off her house someday. But her children and grandchildren took it seriously and made it come true on her birthday. Inside the birthday card, they gave her a check for the remaining balance of her mortgage. She says, "We were just as surprised as she was," or they said, her son Tony says, "We were just as surprised as she was that we were able to do it," according to blacknews.com. As a part of me never thought it was possible. It meant as much to me as it did to her. Tony said he had always thought of giving this gift to his mother since he was 14 years old. So for the last 2 years, he teamed up with his two sisters, Sherry and Jessica, to start saving up to finally make it happen. The siblings say that one of their sisters died last October and that it was obviously very devastating for their mother. After that, we said we have to do this for her, Tony said. You never know how much time you have with someone. June says that she feels blessed to be able to proudly celebrate the moment with both her children and grandchildren. Congratulations to that family. What a great story that is. And also, Sha'Carri Richardson has let her feelings be known in a series of tweets about her suspension that cost her a chance to appear in the Olympics. She says, "I'm sorry, I can't be y'all Olympic champ this year." That's how she wrote it. "But I promise I'll be your world champ next year." Then she goes on to say, "The support my community was invaluable." She says, "I thank you all. The negative," she says, "forget all," as far as the negative is concerned, she says, "forget all y'all and enjoy the games because we all know it won't be the same." And then as the criticism mounted, her response was, "All these perfect people that know how to live life, I'm glad I'm not one of them." And she also said, "I'm only human," and that she is. She will be back. You can rest assured that Sha'Carri Richardson is not done yet. She's young. She made a foolish mistake. And I believe, based on her comments, she's learned from it. And again, we are live again. We've spent the week away, but now we're back. And we're talking this morning about Bill Cosby. As you know, last week, the decision came down from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court vacating the conviction and the sentencing of the comedian. The court said that the trial was not legal. And here to talk about it is somebody who's followed it from the beginning, Nicole Lewis from 92.3 in Atlanta, Georgia. Good morning, Nicole.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown, for inviting me.
Well, thank you for taking the time out, especially early this morning, Nicole. We really appreciate it. Nicole, let me start this way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important. If you thought Mr. Cosby was guilty, would you tell your listeners, would you tell your audience that?
Yes.
And when you went into the trial, Nicole, mm-hmm. What was your thoughts? Did you have any preconceived ideas of what you were going to see or hear at the trial?
Actually, I did, because I was starting up my YouTube channel, and I think I was well into like a year into my YouTube channel, because this happened around 2014, 15. And I felt this was a great way to, be my own investigative journalist, and actually go to the second trial. I wasn't at the first one. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, as I was going through learning about the trial, actually following it, and then looking at how mainstream media was presenting it, I was very uncomfortable by what I was hearing. I felt like we were not getting a full perspective of this. It seemed very rushed, a lot of people just coming out all at once. And it just made me take a pause. I'm like, this doesn't feel right. Like, I have to see this for myself. And that's how I became interested in covering it for my channel.
Yeah, and not to jump ahead, but you just said something that reminded me of Keisha Knight Pulliam. Keisha was the only member of the cast of the Cosby Show to come to the trial. She spent the day at the trial, and she said, "I had to see for myself," and she was blasted for that.
Yeah.
I know you remember that because it was the second trial when she came. What was your thoughts on that? Because I know we could talk about, and we will talk about Felicia Rashad this morning as well. But what was your thoughts on that? We people, you well remember, of course, the Michael Jackson trial where, you know, Stars Upon Stars came out.
Right.
In the Cosby case, none of the stars came out. And Keisha came out and was, like I said, she was blasted. And she made a statement just like what you just said. She said, "I had to see for myself." What's your thoughts on these many that Bill Cosby really, you think about those he's helped, those he has supported, those who he opened so many doors for, none of them showed up.
I think like I said, the mainstream media news coverage of it and the fact that they were advertising it's 60 women. It's 60 women. I think they learned from the previous trials from Jackson to Simpson. You know, we have to blow this up. It has to be grand, so to speak. And I think it scared a lot of people away. And I think people are like, whoa, we can't be associated with this. We were coming up in the era of the Me Too movement. You had all this going on at the same time, and it scared a lot of people away, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, this is the thing that we keep hearing. I did Court TV the other day. I did the Black News Channel the other day, and the question that kept coming at me, well, 60 women, what about them? What's your response to that?
I always felt that was a lazy response. If you can't even name, aside from the main accuser, if you can't name at least the five, like let's say five other accusers, to me, I just felt like that was just a dead talking point. That's not to say that, you know, we totally ignore what these other women are saying, but I felt like it wasn't fair that mainstream media was not investigating these women. They were just bringing them on CNN with Don Lemon. And we could actually go and look up these women's backgrounds.
Yeah.
And it would be there. And you're like, no one is checking this. Like, there was no accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, in fact, I know that's exactly what Mrs. Cosby had said early on. She's like, is anybody going to look into these women? And no one really did. There was that huge story. I forget which magazine had all of these women on the cover, but even in that, it was more of a pictorial than any facts that was being presented. And that was the problem that Mr. Cosby had said he had, that no one is presenting any facts. Now, as a journalist, Nicole, it had to be disturbing because we watched, and I don't know what you saw, if you saw the same thing I saw, journalists at the trial congregating together and comparing notes to make sure that everyone was on the same page. I had never saw that before. I covered Michael Jackson's trial, covered the civil trial of O.J. Simpson and other high-profile trials. And my experience was that if a reporter from, say, AP missed something, he couldn't go to a reporter from USA Today and get that information. But that was readily happening during the Cosby trial. Was that something you experienced as well?
Absolutely. When I went to the second trial, I was sitting in the back next to journalists from some of these major news corporations. And when Andrea Constant was testifying, you could hear them whispering, she changed her story. She changed her story. We heard this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like, are y'all gonna actually report it though?
Right.
That's the problem. That's been the whole problem with the mainstream media omitting information and not being truthful and fully honest about this.
Yeah, there's one report. NBC has really been putting a lot of information out. They've been making it a point of interviewing the accusers all over again since the Supreme Court's decision. But
Mhm.
one of the journalists at NBC, I think it was a legal analyst, I forget his name, but his first reaction was, well, don't get too excited because the prosecutors can, and I suspect they will, look into Fallon again. Um, but again, the Supreme Court's ruling prohibits them
Right.
from going after Bill Cosby again. Talk about that ruling. Three of the concurring
Mhm.
opinions were
Mhm.
women.
Yes. Yes.
How important was that, Nicole?
I think that was very important because it showed that they looked at the facts. They looked at how Mr. Cosby was promised this deal with the prior DA, Bruce Castor, and how this is like, whoa, this is a constitutional issue. You cannot violate this man's constitutional rights. Rights. I think they did the correct thing. I remember watching it back in December. And you could tell they were not impressed with this DA bringing this case on. So, in a lot of ways, we didn't know how this outcome was going to be. But when you go back and look, they were pretty much letting you know, no, this is not okay. This is no, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. We had actually Andrew Wyatt, Bill Cosby's spokesperson, on that
Mhm,
day on December 1st of 2020, and we were playing the court um, arguments live and
mhm,
discussing it as it was happening. You're absolutely right. You got the sense it would, after watching that, it would have been an upset if they would not have made the decision they made, because the questions that the justices had for the prosecutors, whose argument really was very, very, uh, in my opinion, it was very sloppily done, their argument, especially when you compare it to Jennifer Bonjean, the attorney
mhm,
for Bill Cosby, who I thought, and I spoke to Jennifer Bonjean a couple of days ago, actually the day that he was released. I spoke to Jennifer Bonjean, and we talked about her argument. And she said that she had just went in, her and her team sat down beforehand, obviously, and she said they all felt comfortable with their argument. They just didn't know how it was going to be received, and
right.
apparently it was received well. I think it's important to Nicole. You're talking to Nicole Lewis, Nicole's View Live, and also hits 92.3 in Atlanta, Georgia. Nicole, talk about the fact that many people are saying it's a technicality. Can you discuss that? Explain to our viewers and our listeners really what that ruling was. Was it a technicality that he got off on?
Absolutely not. I don't think people realize how hard it is to have a case overturned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That is a monumental deal. It's not a technicality. I think this is another mainstream media talking point to kind of just explain away why this happened instead of breaking down the facts that the whole entire trial was tainted, as they said in their opinions. I mean, how can you unless you followed it like I did, there's no way that this should have went on. There's just absolutely no way. They were absolutely correct.
Yeah, and we saw Judge Joe Brown
Mhm,
talk about this case. We've seen a couple of others talk about this case, but Judge Joe Brown was making some points about. Um, he mentioned the use of quaaludes, and he mentioned that uh, years ago how that was the thing that people did. Now, I think it's important to remind folks too, Nicole, that Bill Cosby was on trial for Andrea Constant and Andrea Constant only. And in that case, we were talking about 1.5 tablets of Benadryl. We wasn't talking about Quaaludes at all. And that, in fact, it was found that it was just that, right?
Right.
Benadryl.
Right.
Um, so back at a time where Quaaludes were the so-called in thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, Judge Joe Brown said that the women who accepted the Quaaludes, because remember, there was no testimony to say that, as you read, that he slipped somebody a Quaalude in their drink or this and that. He was talking about the pervasive use of Quaaludes. How important is that? Because it got lost, it seems, in the coverage over the last few years.
Yes, yes. That's one big thing we have to highlight because Constant did not take Quaaludes. She took Benadryl. I mean, they even had an expert testify to this. Like, Benadryl does not make you foam at the mouth and go completely out. Yeah, it may make you drowsy, but it doesn't make the effects didn't make sense. That's one of the reasons why I believe Castor didn't push this case on. It was just mind blowing, you know. Quaaludes, he was talking about in the 70s, not Andrea Constant, and that did not get the media didn't do anything about to explain that. They didn't do anything about it. They
Yeah,
just kind of put it out there, Quaaludes, this deposition, not explaining everything in context.
yeah, and Nicole, one of the women
Mhm.
who and not to, we don't want to relitigate it because there's no sense
Mhm.
of relitigate it, but one of the women testified that she went with a friend, and I'll say this because Mr. Cosby and I talked about this over the weekend.
Mhm.
She said she went to a friend. She went with a friend to his house in Reno. There was a party at Cosby's house in Reno,
Mhm.
and the friend took her there. Now, under cross-examination, I believe it was under cross-examination where she finally admitted that she took a Quaalude herself before arriving there.
Yes.
And one of the things she said when asked, well, why did you take a Quaalude? Because she said that when she once there, he offered her, and the key word again, according what Bill Cosby said, he offered and she accepted another one. He didn't know that she had already taken one, but he offered. Mr. Cosby said, well, she said she wanted to get in the mood when they asked, and this was on record. This is on record in court.
Mhm. Mhm.
Nobody asked her, get in the mood for what? And also, Mr. Cosby said this to me the other day. He says, anybody ever asked whatever happened to the friend? Because you remember the friend disappeared,
Right.
allegedly.
Right.
So when you hear things like that, you wonder, Nicole, and I'm asking you, why haven't we read about these things?
Once again, it goes back to the mainstream media omitting this information. I feel, in my opinion, that they had this little agenda set up, this whole thing, and they had to frame it as best as possible to make him look like he did it.
Yeah.
And when you go and research it, you're like, this is totally not what happened. We were lied to. A lot of people don't realize they were misled.
And they've dug their heels in, though, nonetheless, right?
Yes, yes. And you see a lot of people are still invested in this. I mean, well, he admitted it. No, he didn't. And no matter how much you show them the transcripts of what was actually said, and you have mainstream media corporations leaving out Mr. Cosby did not admit to drugging women against their will, it's just frightening. It's
Yeah.
frightening. This is why outlets like yours is so important. Black Press USA, YC News, because we need alternative news that is actually going to tell the truth.
Yeah, and I would add Nicole's view is extremely important, has been extremely important. You can watch Nicole's view on YouTube. It's always riveting programming that you have on. And you mentioned this as our producer was saying beforehand. The decision was not. People have to understand this too. Even if you don't like Mr. Cosby,
Yes.
this decision was not about Bill Cosby. This
Right.
decision was to protect the future of agreements between prosecutors and defendants. And here's the thing with that. And you know, this is not just opinion.
Right.
Black people in general should care about that decision.
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna let you tell us, why should we care about that decision?
This is your constitutional rights. Due process. You cannot just do your own thing. Kevin Steele, I don't know what this man was thinking. There was a reason why Bruce Castor didn't go about this. Like, this is why, because you cannot use this man's words against him in a trial. That is not due process.
Especially taking the words out of context too, right? Because that you read the deposition,
right?
You're one of like 5 people in the world who read the deposition, right? Because people haven't read that deposition. They've only gone by the little bits that was put out in press releases by the prosecutor's office, right?
Correct.
In its totality. Nicole, did Mr. Cosby ever say, I drugged women and I raped women or sexually assaulted women?
Absolutely not. And this is another thing that gives me a headache. Even if he were to do that, do you guys not think they would have not prosecuted him then? Like that makes no sense.
Yeah.
People are not critically thinking. That's been the problem with this.
Yeah, there have been, highlights. Yes, I gave a woman a Quaalude, and I think it was Andrea Constant's attorney, Dolores Troiani, who asked him the follow-up question. You gave it to them with the intentions of having sex, and I think his answer was along the lines of, it boiled down to a yes, that the intention was that he was going to have sex with them. Yes, eventually, right? It wasn't that I wanted to get them high. It's like, this is what was going on back then. We saw Jimmy J.J. Walker on, I think, CNN a few years ago when this all came out, when it broke. And he talked about the Quaalude era of the 70s. And he said, well, women were wanting it just as much, if not more, than men.
Yes.
And Jimmy J.J. Walker wasn't necessarily defending Bill Cosby. He was just saying, you can't just go by that.
Yes.
But people have gone by that.
Right. And that's so unfair because, like he said, that was the culture then. That's what they did. I remember The Atlantic did a whole write-up and they were just fawning, the memories of Quaaludes. They were fawning over it. And then a couple of years later, they're demonizing Bill Cosby for talking about it and him having it. It just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense.
And I want to go back a minute too, as I said, how important this was, because for Black people in general, because we are often the victims of false charges. We are often the victim of malicious prosecution, right? And so when we say, when we see people get behind this without knowing the facts, it becomes dangerous, because what you're saying is, the Supreme Court should have left the status quo. So if you ever got in trouble, and it wasn't your fault, now you got nothing to lean back on.
Right.
And we see the reports from different agencies, different nonprofits about how often African Americans are charged, wrongly prosecuted, wrongly convicted. And yet we are comfortable with the status quo. We shouldn't be comfortable with that, should we? Right.
That's why I find it just amazing. You have some people saying, "Oh, well, his money got him off." Really? This is insane talk.
Well, one of the things he said to me, Bill Cosby said to me, and he reiterated it again when we spoke the other day. He says, he had the means, obviously he had the fame, and he said, but they still was able to do this to me. So what about those who don't? And remember now, he spent almost 3 years with many people who are locked up, right? Because of whatever reason they're locked up, right? But they don't have the opportunity to take it to the higher courts. Well, in this case, because he had the opportunity, his money is going to pay off for a lot of people.
Yes.
Because they can't do this in. They can't be no more Kevin Steele's and Judge O'Neill's making, as they say, willy-nilly decisions and tainting a trial. So the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, Nicole, they said Bill Cosby did not receive a fair trial. Shouldn't that be enough?
You would think. And the fact that they didn't bounce this back to Kevin Steele. That lets you know right there.
Yeah.
They had to make it, it had to even out. I mean, with the coverage, how they did him, the trial, it had to be equaled out. And I think it was a fair decision. Absolutely.
Yeah. And let's talk about Nicole. We haven't gotten a chance to talk about this yet. Felicia Rashad and,
Yeah.
and Mr. Cosby, I'm pretty sure you've seen his tweets about it.
Mhm.
And she has, she put out a statement,
Mhm.
and Howard University, which, she just started on July 1st.
Mhm.
She put this statement out. She was relieved. She was elated, really, that he was freed and that the Supreme Court made this decision. And she was absolutely attacked by Howard University, at least the students or alumni or whomever, right? Got a lot of heat for it. And she ultimately had to put out another statement. And Mr. Cosby put out a statement in support of her. Your take on the fact that we are now suppressing people's First Amendment rights?
It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing. When Miss Rashad came out and said that statement, she said nothing about the alleged victims. She said nothing about them. She just said that this was corrected. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court did the right thing. And it's scary that we live in these times where you can't even speak.
Yeah.
You can't even speak your mind.
Yeah.
It's disturbing to me.
Yeah, she she received some support just over the weekend too from Stephanie Mills.
Yes.
Stephanie Mills backed her, and she made a statement. This is what I wanted to bring to you as well, and I'm sure you probably saw this part of the statement that Stephanie Mills made. If Howard University wants to take this position, then they should give back all the money that Bill Cosby has donated to them. Now, the Cosbys has donated more than $200 million to schools and universities, a lot of HBCUs, but a lot of mainstream universities as well, right? We saw early on all of these honorary degrees being, they took away from Mr. Cosby. And there was this talk among his supporters that they should give the money back if they were going to do that. No one, and he told me this because I asked, no one gave the money back. No one even thought about giving the money back. Nicole, what's your view, Nicole's view live on that?
What is my take on that?
Yes.
I find it so hypocritical because it's like, okay, I do believe Howard let him keep his honorary degree, but I know a lot of them didn't. They stripped him of them. But I just find it amazing. If you feel like he is this bad man that did all these things, then you should reimburse. You're stripping away honorary degrees. I think it's only fair. You don't want to be associated with him. Well, return his money.
Yeah. Nicole, and I have to ask this question, and the reason I have to ask Nicole is because it seems that Nicole, well, it not seems, but Nicole's been the one who's really followed this. And so, we saw Allison Mack from Smallville be sentenced. She basically got 15 months, right?
Right.
She used her fame and money to lure unsuspected women, and a bunch of them, into sex slavery, and she got 15 months in prison, right? Basically in jail, because when it's under 2 years, it's jail.
Right.
But I want to go back to even more. Roman Polanski was convicted, right, of a very heinous crime against a 12-year-old girl. Since he's been convicted and escaped justice, he went to France, right, where he couldn't be extradited.
Correct.
He has won an Academy Award in the support of Hollywood. Woody Allen is still making movies despite the multiple allegations against him. We can go on and on and on. The former president was elected with multiple allegations of sex assault.
Yes.
We hear nothing about that. I saw Tarana Burke talk about Mr. Cosby over the weekend, but I see nothing about Allison Mack. I see nothing about Woody Allen. I see nothing about Roman Polanski, anyone else. Why Bill Cosby?
Right. I can only think one thing, it's racism. Allison Mack was alleged to be a part of a sex cult where they branded women.
Well, she's convicted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. Well, she's convicted. There you go. Yeah. It's just, you just see the racism. Even with Woody Allen, you mentioned there were celebrities that came out and spoke in defense of him, and they didn't treat them like they did Felicia Rashad.
Yeah, yeah. And we're now joined just on time by our president and CEO, the one and only Dr. Ben Chavis. Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
Good morning. Good morning. I apologize for being so late. I want to thank our guest for her wisdom and her experience. It's been a great show, and thank you, Stacy. I'm in New York this morning. I'm getting ready to go back to Washington, but I just wanted to come on and give everybody the greetings, and thank you for a great show this morning.
And Dr. Chavis, while we have you, Dr. Chavis, I think it's important to know, and good morning, Cheryl Smith. It's always good to have Cheryl Smith with us. It's important, your perspective. Now, Dr. Chavis, you, other than Andrew Wyatt, Bill Cosby's spokesperson, and his legal team, you're the only person to have visited Mr. Cosby in prison. Yes. You've also had extensive conversations with Mr. Cosby and Mrs. Cosby. You were wrongfully convicted of a crime in the 1970s, and we know that you spent almost 10 years in prison with the Wilmington 10. Can you just give us a little insight as to your perspective on this situation with Bill Cosby? How important that Supreme Court decision was, because you went through the same thing.
It's a very important decision by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It's prosecutorial misconduct. Yes. It's judicial misconduct. This is not, and everybody refers to the case as some technicality. No, this is a major overturn of a conviction because the trial should have never happened in the first place. Right. And, you know, it was all kind of constitutional violation of Bill Cosby's rights. And there was a rush to judgment. Everybody, the prosecutor, the judge, Bill Cosby was guilty to proven innocent rather than innocent to proven guilty. And this is the double standard, the racism in the criminal justice system. And I think that it took a lot of courage for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to do what it did, because in overturning the unjust conviction, it exposed the racism, it exposed the injustice. And when we talk about systemic racism, it shows you that this is a system of injustice, not just a couple of individuals of injustice. This is a system of injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole Lewis has been covering the trial. Dr. Chavis, as you well know, she's been all over it, and she's really
thank Nicole also, and you, Stacy. You're two of the few African American journalists and people who observe what is going on to Black America, who have the courage to not only print the truth but speak truth to power. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chavis.
we definitely thank you, Dr. Chavis. And Nicole, I want to just briefly, before we close out, I wanted to go back to the honorary degrees and the situation where people can't speak out. Mr. Cosby couldn't speak out. That's the other thing. And perhaps Dr. Chavis can lend some insight too. And perhaps you, Nicole, I'm sure you can lend some insight into this. People say, well, you know, first of all, we talked about him not admitting to anything, because look, this guy was offered a plea deal and during the first trial in which it was no jail time involved. He says, I'm not going to plead to anything that I didn't do. And then we saw last month the parole board denied his parole because he refused to admit to anything that he said he didn't do. But here's the thing. The point is this, that we have a situation where this man's had stood firm about, I didn't do it, and I'll do the whole 10 years instead of saying I did something I didn't do. Isn't there something to be said about that, Nicole, that he, because he said to me, Dr. Chavis, that when he sat there in the courtroom, he said they were all these people that came to testify again. He says, I felt like I was a casting director, and all I had in front of me was people who was so bad at acting. If I cast them as themselves, they couldn't play themselves. So that's an exact quote from Bill Cosby that I'm sharing this morning. In fact, he said, "I really want you to share that quote." But Nicole, isn't it important that you have to? Everybody says they're not guilty. We know that.
Right.
When you are passing up opportunities at his age
Mm-hmm.
of freedom,
Right.
doesn't that speak a little bit louder?
Exactly. That really speaks to it. I noticed on social media when that happened, when the parole board denied him, a lot of people were like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe there is something here. So that says a lot. I mean, if he was guilty, I'm sure he'd be like running, let me get out of here. But he stayed true to principle. And I can only admire that.
Yeah. Plus, he has some health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then there still is that threat of COVID in the prisons.
Right.
So there's a lot of things going there. You're talking about somebody who can't see,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you would think that freedom, and I do know, and I know Andrew doesn't mind me sharing this, but I do know that he had reached a point where, he was like, I want to go home.
Right.
But I'm not going to say I did something that I didn't do. And so we have that, and again, it's ignored, greatly ignored. But what's the lasting message, Nicole, that people should really take from this?
I think people need to really be critical thinkers. Please know what you're intaking, what you're watching. Go look up research, look up the facts for yourself. That's the thing I did. I had the opportunity. I wasn't working during the second trial. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and every morning when I could, I would drive there and I would take notes, and I wanted to hear the actual evidence, the facts. And I came to the conclusion, in my opinion, I do not believe he was guilty of this crime.
And you don't believe that just because he's Black, right?
Correct. Correct.
Because that's what I get a lot. Oh, just because he's Black. And
he's a celebrity. Yeah,
or a celebrity. That's just not the case at all. And I mean, we have Dr. Chavis here, and we know, if you picked up a book or anything, you understand that it's, what his history was and his fight. I see a lot of a fight in Bill Cosby that I still see working every day with Dr. Chavis, because it's not just about him. And with Bill Cosby, he keeps saying it's not about me. And Dr. Chavis has never been about Dr. Chavis. So I think it's so important to that people really listen and like you said, educate themselves. Dr. Chavis talks about that a lot. I know, Dr. Chavis, you're a huge advocate of educating yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a big debate now about critical race theory, whether or not our country can, or our nation, our society, or the world we live in can deal with the truth. We must deal with the truth. I think what Frederick Douglass said centuries ago is true now. Freedom is a constant struggle, and we have to continue to wage struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. And I think that Bill Cosby's legacy, good name, is going to be restored, and he will move forward. Although there's still a lot of player haters out there, still a lot of distractors. But he's made it through the hardest part, and now he will continue to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will continue to follow and watch Nicole's View live on YouTube. And Dr. Chavis, you can now listen to Nicole on 92.3, the hits in Atlanta. I know you go there sometimes to Atlanta.
Yes, I do.
I just went through there. So you can listen to her. She always has great guests. And even if she doesn't have a guest, it's great topics. So we love listening to Nicole's View. I follow her on Twitter. You can follow Nicole on Twitter as well. What's the Twitter handle, Nicole?
It is at BLK Black Liberation 84.
There you go. BLK Liberation.
Thank you again, Nicole, for your leadership.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't forget to watch the Chavis Chronicles on PBS TV and PBS World, starring that man right there, our boss, the NMPA's president and CEO, for more in-depth Black news. Let it be known, it's extremely damaging to a fair trial to have people reaching judgment about a case in the newspapers and on the radio before the facts are heard in a case. And that was from author Bill James. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow.